welcome to OLT 321, European Literature. My name is Warren Reed, and we're going today jump into Lecture 3 about Old Goriot's style and structure. First, we're going to talk about the structure of Old Goriot. Then we're going to talk about Eugène de Rastignac as the viewpoint character, and then briefly about the style of Old Goriot. And I put the emphasis on brief because we're still suffering from the shock and damage of that really long first lecture. So sorry about that, and here we go. Let's jump right in. By the way, I'm going to put a summary of the novel on Old Goriot so we don't have to talk about all of that. Okay, the structure. First, there's no chapter numbers and chapter titles like most novels. You know, there used to be like Chapter 1, When He Wakes Up in a Cave. Chapter 2, How He Finds His Way Out of the Cave and Makes a Friend. Chapter 3, How He Finds Food and Feeds Himself and His Friend. You see these things that tell you what's going on. We don't have that, and that kind of adds to the realism. It gives us a sense that it's one continuous whole without any kind of breaks, sort of the way a film might be. Then we have, the book is made up of 4 sections. The first section is the preamble, and it describes the boarding house and Madame Vauquer, the owner of the boarding house, and the different residents. Now, what is a boarding house? Many students think that it's a hostel for students to stay in, and that Old Goriot is a big pervert preying on girls. No. The girls in the story are his daughters. And he's not that kind of weirdo. And it's a boarding house. A boarding house is someone who owns a large house with enough rooms, and maybe there's a few of them in the family, so there's rooms, they rent them out. They rent rooms to lodgers, to boarders. It's a boarding house. Okay, sometimes it's room and board. You have a room and you have breakfast, lunch and dinner, or breakfast and dinner, something like that. Okay. So that's then the preamble. In the prologue, we have Eugène de Rastignac, who is introduced as the viewpoint character. And from here on, we get the story through his eyes. It's called the limited omniscient narrative viewpoint. So he's sort of, the author knows everything through the eyes of Eugène de Rastignac. Also, we have the use of letters. This is an epistolary strategy. Epistle means a letter. It's, old language, means letters. And letters are a way of telling a story, and they can make the writer's job easier by contracting things. In the letter, you can spend a whole chapter or one letter briefly to say what's going on. And also it adds to a sense of realism because, letters are real things that communicate. So this is another tactic of realism. Then we have the third section, which shows the conflict that Rastignac has. Shall he follow fashion or shall he follow his conscience? And it's also where he learned the reality behind the many marriages, that they're not based on love, but they're based on, the best financial and political position. Where can a family get the best leg up in the world? By marrying their daughter to this guy or that guy. Finally, there's the fourth section, which is the resolution. Here we have Old Goriot deserted by his daughters, and he dies. Then we have Vautrin arrested. See, loose ends wrapped up, that's the resolution. And finally, it culminates in Rastignac's decision to follow his conscience and declare war on society instead of being its baby or being bound to its rules. Next, we talk about Eugène de Rastignac as the viewpoint character. This technique of limited omniscient narrator. Why? Well, I already mentioned it lets us filter things through his eyes. And why specifically him? Well, he's from the south, so he's not from Paris, so everything will be new to him. So it's new to us as readers, so we get it, rather than the narrator just telling us stuff, we experience it the way he does. Okay, so there's a sense of realism there. Second of all, he's from the south, so southern people, there's a stereotype that they're more adventurous. So he's ready to and game to try things and jump in and explore. So we see more thanks to him. Also, he's from the poor nobility, so he's there trying to raise himself up, looking for chances and advantages to get rich and to get a good position in society. Maybe even restore his family's lost glory. Also, he's a student of law, but we see very little about the actual law, but more about the laws of human nature explored. So that's an interesting contradiction. We also see an interesting contradiction between the bourgeoisie following the laws of the nation, but not necessarily following the moral laws or rules of moral behavior. So, the daughters abandon their father, the stepsons ignore their father-in-law, that kind of thing. That's why Balzac chose Rastignac as the viewpoint character, because his goal to become rich and higher in society is what drives the story, what drives him forward. Character desire is the best engine of any story. Also, now we're going to talk quickly about style. Balzac uses a lot of modifiers and hyperbole. Hyperbole means exaggeration. He lays it on thick a little bit. And this is so that we fully get the point and we understand the circumstances and the extremes of the behavior of these characters. They also reveal the attitude of the author towards his topic and his characters. These commentaries are intended to make sure the reader understands what's going on, as well as to make sure the reader sees the events the way the author wants us to see them. There's debate about these kind of things in novels. Many critics think they're not needed. They sort of interrupt with the suspension of disbelief. They interrupt our imaginings of the novel as we're reading it. A bit like I said, the cell phone going off in the cinema spoils your enjoyment of the film. Others think that it's necessary, especially with novels from earlier times in history. They do help us maybe understand the context. But as for myself, I don't prefer them. I think it's better that the work speak for itself. There's no need to ram the points home, or, as my mother would say, flog the dead horse. A dead horse won't go no matter how much you beat him. So it's up to you. Do you want the artist to tell you how to interpret the work and then spare you the work of doing any thinking? Or do you want to interpret it in your own way, make your own judgments and do your own thinking? So that brings us to the end. Ooh, that was fast. My head is spinning. At the end of this lecture, we talked about the structure of Old Goriot, we talked about Eugène de Rastignac as viewpoint character, and we talked a bit about the style. Now, we're going to pause and let me get ready, prepare for the next lecture. Lecture 4, again on Old Goriot, last one.